He was acquitted on all 10 counts. A jury of 12 people deliberated for 32 hours, reviewed the testimony of 140 witnesses, and handed down a unanimous verdict, not guilty. By every legal measure, the case was closed. That man was Michael Jackson, the most famous person on earth, according to Guinness World Records, and a performer whose influence had reached tribes in the Amazon. And now, 21 years after that verdict, a Netflix documentary has done something the original trial never could: ripped the case back open in front of 17.8 million people in 5 days. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what the documentary reveals that the 2026 biopic deliberately left out, and why that gap between those two stories may be the most important thing happening in Michael Jackson's legacy right now. The house where it all started was 2 bedrooms. Michael Joseph Jackson was born on August 29, 1958, the 8th of 10 children in a working-class family on Jackson Street in Gary, Indiana. His father, Joe, worked as a crane operator in a steel mill. His mother, Catherine, worked at Sears. 9 children shared that 2-bedroom house, and the family could not afford to put Christmas lights on the exterior. When Joe discovered his son Tito had secretly been playing his guitar, he didn't punish him, he formed a band. Michael joined as a performer at age 5. By age 8, he was the lead vocalist. The Jackson 5 signed with Motown Records in 1968. Their first 4 singles on Motown all went to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, a record no group had matched at the time. Michael was 11 years old during those recording sessions. He would later write in his 1988 autobiography that his childhood offered no birthdays and no Christmas, but he said he would not have changed it. The discipline, the rehearsal schedule, the relentless pressure, it produced something that the music industry had never seen before. And here is what most people gloss over. The moment that made Michael Jackson a global phenomenon was not Thriller. It was 25 seconds on March 25, 1983, during the NBC television special Motown 25, when he first performed the moonwalk. He had learned the move from dancer Jeffrey Daniel. Nobody in the production had seen it beforehand. 47 million people watched live. The phones at Motown did not stop ringing. Most people who know this story stop here. But the real story starts right now. Thriller was released in 1982 and became the best-selling album in music history. Over 70 million copies sold worldwide. Michael won 8 Grammys for that record alone. By the mid-1980s, he was, by any reasonable measure, the most commercially successful entertainer on the planet. He sold an estimated 500 million records across his career. He scored 13 #1 singles on the Billboard Hot 100. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice, once with the Jackson 5 in 1997, and again as a solo artist in 2001. He holds the record for the only artist to achieve a U.S. top 10 single in 6 consecutive decades. The wealth was extraordinary. In 1985, he purchased the ATV Music Publishing catalog for $47.5 million, a catalog that included publishing rights to the Beatles' song library. That acquisition was widely regarded as one of the most lucrative music business deals of the 20th century. But there was a second financial reality that the 2026 biopic, which earned over $900 million at the global box office, chose not to show. By the time Jackson announced his This Is It residency in 2009, he was carrying somewhere between $400 million and $500 million in personal debt. The Neverland Ranch, the property that became both his sanctuary and the central location in his legal battles, had cost tens of millions to build and maintain. His prescription drug dependency had accelerated after a Pepsi commercial filming accident in January 1984 left him with severe burns and chronic pain. He was preparing the comeback tour in large part because he had to. The money was no longer endless. And that's when the decision was made. The one nobody around him saw coming. The event that triggered everything was a documentary. In 2003, British journalist Martin Bashir aired a film called Living with Michael Jackson. In it, Jackson was filmed holding hands with a 13-year-old boy named Gavin Arvizo and openly defending the practice of sharing his bed with children. Prosecutors would later describe that broadcast as the beginning of Jackson's public relations collapse. Within months of the film's airing, Arvizo's family came forward with allegations that Jackson had molested the teenager at Neverland Ranch. Jackson was arrested in November 2003. The charges were extensive: 4 counts of molesting a minor, 4 counts of intoxicating a minor, 1 count of attempted molestation, and 1 count of conspiracy. If convicted on the most serious charges, he faced up to 20 years in prison. The trial began on February 28, 2005, in Santa Maria, California. The judge banned cameras from the courtroom. Outside, the scene was something else entirely. Fans in white clothing, television satellite trucks from every major network, tabloid reporters camping on the courthouse lawn for 4 months. Jackson arrived to his own trial in pajamas on one occasion after being hospitalized. He had grown visibly frail. 140 witnesses testified. The prosecution called former Neverland employees who described patterns of behavior. The defense called celebrities, including Macaulay Culkin and Chris Tucker, who testified Jackson had never behaved inappropriately with them as children. Here's what the comments kept asking. And here's the answer they never got, until now. What actually decided the trial was not Jackson's celebrity. The jury said so directly. On the initial vote in deliberations, 9 jurors voted to acquit and 3 voted guilty. After 32 hours over 7 days, they came back unanimous. In post-verdict interviews, jurors were specific. The timeline the prosecution offered was logically problematic. The alleged molestation was supposed to have occurred after the Bashir documentary aired, meaning during the period when Jackson was under the most intense public scrutiny in his life. Jurors found it difficult to accept that this was when the crime had been committed. The testimony of Arvizo's mother, Janet, was, by multiple juror accounts, actively damaging to the prosecution's case. She was on the stand for 5 days. Prosecutors reportedly began objecting to their own witness's testimony before she finished. One juror later described the family as appearing to be motivated by financial gain. The defense had pointed out that before contacting law enforcement, the family had first consulted with 2 attorneys, including the same lawyer who had negotiated a prior civil settlement against Jackson in the 1993 case. The jury stated it plainly. The prosecution presented copious amounts of evidence, but almost none of it was physical. What remained was largely testimonial, and that testimony had been successfully attacked. On June 13, 2005, Judge Rodney Melville announced, "Mr. Jackson, your bail is exonerated, and you are released." Jackson did not speak publicly for nearly 2 weeks. He then released a written statement thanking his fans. He never returned to Neverland Ranch. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. Jackson died on June 25, 2009. He was 50 years old. The cause was acute propofol and benzodiazepine intoxication administered by his personal physician, Dr. Conrad Murray. Murray was later convicted of involuntary manslaughter. Jackson was preparing for a 50-show residency at London's O2 Arena that he had agreed to for financial reasons. He never performed a single show. The debate about his legacy did not stop with his death. In 2013, Australian choreographer Wade Robson, who had testified in the 2005 trial as a defense witness, stating that Jackson had never acted inappropriately with him, reversed his position entirely. Robson filed a lawsuit claiming Jackson had molested him over a period of 7 years as a child. In 2014, James Safechuck made similar allegations. Their accounts formed the basis of the 2019 documentary Leaving Neverland. FBI files released after Jackson's death noted no outstanding credible leads from their investigations, though they acknowledged assisting local authorities. This is the landscape into which the 2026 biopic walked. Antoine Fuqua's Michael was released in April 2026. It starred Jackson's own nephew, Jafar Jackson, in his acting debut. The film covered Jackson's rise from Gary, Indiana through the Bad World Tour in 1988, and then stopped, deliberately. The script had originally included dramatizations of the 1993 allegations, but a clause in the civil settlement barred any dramatization of the accuser, forcing a complete overhaul of the third act. The film earned a 97% audience score and a 39% critic score. It passed $900 million at the global box office and is now the highest-grossing music biopic ever made. Then Netflix dropped Michael Jackson: The Verdict on June 3, 2026. At this point in the story, most people walked away. What happened instead is the part nobody talks about. The Netflix documentary pulled 17.8 million viewers in its first 5 days. It reached #1 in 61 countries, including the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, France, Brazil, and Australia. It is, by viewing numbers, one of the most-watched documentary series in Netflix history. It also received a 6% rating from Netflix subscribers, which is, by most accounts, a record low for the platform. The backlash was specific. Critics and fans alike identified that the documentary gave heavy screen time to Martin Bashir, the journalist whose 2003 film ignited the original investigation. Viewers accused the production of using Bashir to frame Jackson as guilty, despite the unanimous acquittal. One reviewer from Slate pointed out that the documentary interviews jurors about their decision but never acknowledges that Wade Robson, a key defense witness in that very trial, later publicly accused Jackson of abuse. That omission meant the verdict told a story about a closed courtroom, without acknowledging how the story continued after those courtroom doors opened. The filmmakers said they aimed to present a historical account of the trial as it actually unfolded in court. They described it as an oral history told by eyewitnesses. Critics countered that a historical account of this particular case cannot responsibly end at the acquittal. What emerged was something that neither the biopic nor the documentary intended. The two projects, watched in sequence, effectively cancel each other out. One showing only the artistry, the other showing only the courtroom, and neither one showing the full picture. The legal verdict was handed down on June 13, 2005. It was unanimous. It was final. No court has ever revisited it. What a $900 million biopic and a record low-rated Netflix documentary together make clear is that legal finality and cultural finality are two entirely different things, and that Michael Jackson's story remains unresolved in the public mind in a way that very few figures in entertainment history can claim. A sequel to the biopic is already in development. It would presumably have to cover the years the first film skipped entirely. Here's the question for you. The 2026 biopic made almost $1 billion by showing only the music and leaving out the trial entirely. Netflix showed only the trial and earned a 6% approval rating. Which version of Michael Jackson's story do you think the public actually deserves to see? And do you believe any film or documentary can ever show both at the same time without choosing a side?